Men aren't stupid, they're not blind, they're not weak. Yet so many find themselves stuck, drained, and questioning their own worth in relationships. Why? Because intelligence isn't the problem, it's the trap they don't see coming. Number 1, the illusion of choice. When a man enters a relationship, he often believes that he is acting out of free will, making his own decisions, choosing his own path, and shaping his future with his partner. But in reality, what appears to be choice is frequently a carefully constructed illusion. This illusion doesn't come from stupidity or weakness, but from the subtle ways in which expectations and unspoken rules are woven into the dynamics of the relationship. A man believes he is deciding out of love, but much of the time the options have already been laid out for him in such a way that no matter what he picks, he is still walking into the same cage. It begins with small things. He thinks he's choosing when he agrees to go along with her preferences, her desires, her plans for the future. But look closer. Was he ever really free to say no without consequences? Was he ever really given the option to assert his own needs without being labeled selfish, cold, or unloving? The illusion of choice is maintained because men are often rewarded when they comply and punished when they resist. Over time, he starts to convince himself that he is making these decisions voluntarily, when in truth he has been conditioned to believe there are only a few acceptable responses, and all of them lead back to her control. In this dynamic, the man's voice becomes quieter. At first, he might express a different opinion, try to set a boundary, or suggest an alternative. But when he sees the disappointment in her eyes, hears the silence, feels the distance, or is confronted with guilt, he learns quickly that disagreement comes at a cost. So instead of pushing back, he begins to adapt. He tells himself, "It's easier this way. I'm just choosing peace. I'm just choosing love." But the question is, was it really a choice? Or was it a form of emotional coercion dressed up as harmony? The illusion is so powerful because it feels like love. A man sacrifices, compromises, and bends, telling himself this is what commitment means. He convinces himself that being accommodating is his choice, that giving up his own preferences is proof of maturity, that surrendering his own desires is the noble path of a good partner. But the trap lies in the fact that over time, his own individuality fades. He no longer remembers what he truly wanted, what his authentic choice would have been, because the relationship has trained him to believe that his role is not to choose, but to comply. And when he looks back, he doesn't see control, he sees his own decisions. That's what makes the illusion so effective. He believes he willingly stepped into every sacrifice, every compromise, every role he plays. He doesn't realize that the options presented to him were never truly his own, that he was guided toward them by fear of rejection, by the need for validation, by the deep human desire to be loved and wanted. This is why men don't recognize the trap. They don't see chains, they see choices, and that's the cruelest part of the illusion. Number 2. Emotional manipulation versus genuine love. One of the greatest confusions men face in relationships is distinguishing between emotional manipulation and genuine love. Both can look strikingly similar on the surface. Both involve expressions of care, attention, and strong emotions. But beneath the surface, their intentions are completely different. Genuine love seeks to nurture, to uplift, and to support, while emotional manipulation is about control, power, and bending someone's will without them realizing it. Men often fall into the trap of confusing the two because manipulation disguises itself in the language of affection. It feels like love in the moment, but its purpose is to serve the manipulator, not the relationship. Emotional manipulation works because it exploits a man's natural desire to protect, provide, and please. When a woman uses guilt, silent treatment, or exaggerated emotional reactions, she is not necessarily showing vulnerability. Instead, She is weaponizing her emotions to steer his behavior in a specific direction. If he doesn't act the way she wants, he feels like the bad partner. He feels responsible for her sadness, her anger, or her disappointment. In that moment, it doesn't feel like control. It feels like he failed her. This is the subtle but powerful way manipulation traps men. It convinces them that their love is measured by how quickly they surrender their own needs to meet hers. Genuine love, on the other hand, never demands that a man compromise his dignity or silence his truth. Genuine love allows space for disagreement, for differences, for individuality. It does not punish a man for saying no. It does not shame him for having boundaries. Genuine love celebrates his presence, not just his sacrifices. When love is real, he feels secure even when he cannot give everything. He feels appreciated not only for what he provides, but for who he is at his core. The difference lies in freedom. Love gives it, manipulation takes it away. The tragedy is that many men are conditioned to interpret manipulation as proof of love. They believe that if she is emotional, if she reacts strongly, it must mean she cares deeply. They confuse intensity with intimacy, drama with passion, and control with commitment. This misunderstanding makes them vulnerable to patterns where they keep giving more and more, not realizing that the affection they receive in return is conditional. It only flows when they obey, when they sacrifice, when they silence themselves for her comfort. That is not love. It is a transaction designed to benefit one side at the expense of the other. Over time, this confusion drains a man of his strength and clarity. He begins to question himself rather than the relationship. He wonders if he is too cold, too selfish, or not enough, when in reality he has simply mistaken manipulation for love. The more he gives, the more the cycle continues, and the less he understands why he feels so empty. Genuine love should make a man feel whole. Manipulation leaves him feeling hollow because it was never about him, it was only about control. Number 3, the cost of pleasing. Many men enter relationships with the belief that their role is to provide, protect, and please. It comes from cultural conditioning, from childhood lessons, and from the internal desire to be seen as valuable in the eyes of the woman they love. On the surface, there is nothing wrong with wanting to make a partner happy. The problem begins when pleasing becomes the center of his existence, when his worth is tied to how much he can sacrifice, and when every decision he makes is driven by her approval rather than his own truth. The cost of living like this is far greater than most men realize, and by the time they do, they have often given away too much of themselves to reclaim. At first, pleasing feels rewarding. He gives his time, his energy, his money, and in return, he receives affection, validation, and sometimes even admiration. But slowly, the balance begins to shift. The more he gives, the more is expected of him. What started as voluntary becomes an obligation. If he stops giving, he risks conflict, silence, or rejection. He doesn't see it happening immediately, but little by little, his identity shrinks down to one role: the man who provides and performs to keep her satisfied. He loses the freedom to say no because no feels like failure, and failure threatens the very connection he is trying to preserve. The cost of pleasing is not only external but deeply internal. A man who constantly bends himself to keep someone else comfortable eventually stops recognizing his own needs. He forgets what he actually enjoys, what boundaries he should protect, and what values he stands for. His self-respect quietly erodes because he no longer lives from his own center. He lives to avoid disappointing someone else. This creates an emptiness inside, a quiet resentment that grows over time, even if he never voices it out loud. He tells himself he is doing the right thing, that this is what love demands, but inside he knows he is slowly being drained. The emotional cost is only part of the equation. There is also the financial and physical toll. Many men work longer hours, push themselves harder, and even neglect their own health in the effort to constantly provide more. They believe that giving beyond their limits is proof of their devotion. Yet no matter how much they give, it never feels like enough. Instead of appreciation, they often find that expectations simply increase. This cycle leaves men exhausted, unfulfilled, and trapped in a pattern that strips them of joy and peace. What makes the cost of pleasing so dangerous is that it feels noble. A man convinces himself that he is doing the right thing, that love requires sacrifice, that this is what makes him worthy. But over time, he realizes the price he pays is his own identity. He loses the freedom to live authentically, to pursue his own dreams, and to feel valued for who he truly is, rather than for what he provides. And once a man sacrifices his sense of self, he has already given up more than love should ever demand. Number 4, shame and guilt as tools. Shame and guilt are two of the most powerful emotional tools in human interaction, and within relationships, they are often used as invisible levers of control. Unlike anger or open conflict, which are easy to recognize, shame and guilt operate quietly, slipping beneath the surface of a man's awareness until he starts doubting himself. He begins to question not only his actions but his character. He wonders if he is failing as a partner, if he is not giving enough, if he is somehow unworthy of the love he desires. This psychological pressure is subtle yet devastating because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like moral obligation. For many men, the fear of being labeled as cold, careless, or unloving is so strong that they quickly surrender when guilt is placed on their shoulders. A partner may say, "If you loved me, you would do this." Or she may not say anything at all but withdraw affection, creating silence heavy enough to communicate the same message. In either case, the man internalizes the idea that refusing or resisting equals failure. He doesn't see it as a choice anymore. He sees it as a test of his worth as a man, and guilt convinces him that passing the test requires compliance. The power of shame is even deeper. While guilt attacks behavior, making him feel bad for what he did or didn't do, shame attacks his identity. It tells him that he is not good enough, that he is not strong enough, that he is not man enough. These words may not even be spoken directly. They are delivered in comparisons, in disappointed looks, in constant reminders of what other men are doing. Slowly, he begins to carry an invisible weight. Every time he tries to assert himself, that shame surfaces, whispering that he will be seen as selfish or inadequate. This kind of control doesn't just change what he does, it changes how he sees himself. What makes shame and guilt so effective is that they strike at a man's deepest needs: the need to be respected, the need to be loved, and the need to be enough in the eyes of the person he cares about. When those needs are threatened, he will do almost anything to protect them. He will overextend, overgive, and overcompensate just to silence the inner voice that tells him he is failing. But the more he does this, the more trapped he becomes, because every act of compliance reinforces the cycle. She learns that these tools work, and he learns that his only escape from the discomfort of shame and guilt is to give in again. The tragic cost is that he loses his authenticity. He no longer acts from a place of genuine desire or love, but from fear of disapproval. His choices are no longer free. They are dictated by the dread of being made to feel like less than a man. Over time, he may not even realize how controlled he has become, because the weight of shame and guilt feels like responsibility, like duty, like proof of his devotion. Yet in reality, it is nothing more than manipulation wrapped in the disguise of love. Number 5, the fear of loss. One of the strongest forces keeping men trapped in unhealthy dynamics is the fear of loss. This fear runs deeper than many realize because it isn't only about losing a woman, it is about losing validation, intimacy, companionship, and even identity. For many men, relationships are not just a part of life. They are the space where they feel most accepted, where they are given purpose, and where they are reminded of their worth. The thought of losing that connection feels unbearable, so they endure situations that drain them, hoping that holding on will protect them from the emptiness they dread. The fear of loss makes men rationalize behavior they would otherwise recognize as unfair. When a partner withholds affection, becomes distant, or threatens to walk away, his immediate instinct is not to confront, but to comply. He tells himself, "If I just give more, if I just try harder, she won't leave." This desperation causes him to ignore his own boundaries. He sacrifices his voice, his peace, and his needs because the idea of being abandoned feels more painful than being mistreated. In this way, the fear of loss becomes a powerful cage, one that doesn't require physical locks because it is built entirely in his mind. This fear is amplified by the way men are conditioned. From a young age, many are taught that their value is tied to being chosen, to being wanted, to being needed. Losing a relationship feels like proof of inadequacy, like failure as a man. So when he senses that the relationship is slipping away, he doesn't step back to evaluate whether it is healthy. He doubles down, trying to prove his worth in any way possible. He convinces himself that the problem must be him, that if he changes enough, sacrifices enough, or gives enough, he can prevent the loss he is terrified of facing. What makes this fear so powerful is that it is not entirely irrational. Loss is real, and with it comes loneliness, emotional pain, and sometimes even social judgment. Men fear being left behind, replaced, or forgotten. They imagine the silence after a breakup, the absence of daily companionship, the loss of intimacy, and they feel a void that seems impossible to fill. This anticipation of pain drives them to cling tighter, even when clinging only deepens their suffering. The paradox is that in trying so hard to avoid loss, they often lose themselves. The fear of loss also distorts perception. A man caught in this cycle begins to exaggerate the value of what he is holding on to while underestimating his own worth. He tells himself she is irreplaceable, that without her he is nothing, that he cannot rebuild. These thoughts blind him to the possibility of healthier connections, of freedom, of peace. They keep him tied to relationships that deplete him, all because the fear of letting go feels worse than the pain of staying. And so, the trap remains closed, not because he is weak, but because his fear convinces him that survival lies in holding on tighter, when in truth, it lies in learning to let go. Number 6, breaking free requires awareness. The first step to breaking free from any trap is awareness. A man cannot escape what he cannot see, and this is why so many remain stuck in cycles of manipulation, guilt, and fear. They believe they are making choices. They believe they are acting out of love, but in reality, they are following patterns set up to keep them compliant. Awareness is the moment when the fog begins to lift, when he looks at his life and finally recognizes that something is deeply wrong. It is the realization that his sacrifices have not brought peace, that his constant efforts to please have not been met with gratitude, and that the weight of shame and guilt pressing on his shoulders is not love, but control. Awareness does not come easily because it requires a man to face uncomfortable truths about himself and his relationship. He has to admit that what he thought was affection was often manipulation. He has to acknowledge that his so-called choices were crafted illusions. He has to confront the reality that fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being unloved, has been steering him far more than his own authentic desires. This kind of honesty can feel brutal because it challenges not just the relationship, but his entire identity. If he admits he has been trapped, he must also admit he allowed it to happen, and that acceptance is painful for any man who prides himself on strength and intelligence. But once awareness begins, the chains start to weaken. A man who sees the manipulation can no longer pretend it is love. A man who notices the cycle of guilt can no longer call it responsibility. A man who realizes that fear is driving his decisions can no longer believe he is truly free. This awakening gives him the power to pause, to step back, and to begin questioning what once felt unquestionable. It is not about anger or revenge, it is about clarity. He sees the pattern, and when he sees it, it loses much of its power over him. Breaking free, however, requires more than recognition. It requires courage to act on that awareness. Awareness without action can become another form of suffering, where a man knows he is trapped but remains too afraid to step out. Yet the awareness itself is still the foundation because it shifts his perspective. He begins to understand that love should not demand the loss of his identity. He begins to see that respect cannot exist where manipulation thrives. He begins to realize that genuine connection does not require him to erase his boundaries. These insights give him the strength to take the next step, whether that means setting limits, reclaiming his voice, or walking away entirely. Awareness is not just about recognizing what is wrong. It is about remembering who he is beneath the layers of control and expectation. It is about rediscovering his own value outside of her approval, his own worth beyond what he provides, his own freedom beyond the fear of being alone. Only when he sees clearly can he reclaim his power, because the trap was never as strong as his blindness to it. Once his eyes open, the illusion crumbles, and what once held him captive can no longer keep him bound. Men are not stupid, they are not weak, they are not blind. They are simply caught in patterns they were never taught to question. But once you see the trap, once you recognize the illusions, the guilt, the fear, you can never unsee it. And that awareness is where freedom begins. Love should not feel like chains, and respect should never demand your silence. Remember this: the strongest man is not the one who sacrifices himself endlessly, but the one who has the courage to walk away from what destroys him and the wisdom to choose only what truly values him.